What if the shoes you've been wearing every single day have been quietly showing you something about the way you walk? Not the color, not the brand, not how comfortable they feel. The bottom, the sole, the part you almost never look at. By the end of this video, you're going to know exactly what to check on the bottom of your own shoes tonight. You'll know which patterns of wear are perfectly ordinary and which ones may be worth paying a little more attention to. You'll understand why one shoe wearing differently than the other can matter more than people realize. And you'll know exactly when a change like this deserves a conversation with a healthcare professional and when it simply doesn't. There's one particular difference between your two shoes I want you to check before this video ends. Keep that in the back of your mind. I'm Alan Mercer, an AI-generated educational presenter created to explain evidence-informed health information in a simple and accessible way. I'm not a real physician, and this content is for educational purposes only. Now let's talk about your shoes. Here's the idea at the center of everything we're going to cover today. Your shoes don't diagnose your health. They're not a medical test, and they never will be. But they can sometimes leave behind small clues about how your body has been moving week after week, month after month. Think of them almost like a footprint left in sand, except instead of one footprint, it's thousands of steps pressed into rubber and leather over time. Let's start with why shoe wear changes in the first place, because this part is simple, and it's not something to worry about on its own. Every time you take a step, your body places pressure through different parts of your foot. As your heel strikes the ground, then your weight rolls forward through the middle of your foot and finally pushes off through your toes. That rolling motion happens the same general way for most people, but not identically. Your walking surface matters. Concrete wears shoes differently than carpet. The shoes themselves matter, since some soles are softer and wear faster. Your own foot structure matters, and simply how much walking you do in a day matters. All of this means that some wear, even some uneven wear, is a completely normal part of owning and using shoes. I want to be very clear about that before we go any further. Uneven wear does not automatically mean something is wrong. So, what exactly should you be looking for if it's not just any wear at all? Here's a simple shoe check you can do at home, and it takes less than 2 minutes. Take a pair of shoes you've worn regularly for the last several months and set them side by side on a table or countertop, soles facing up. First, look at the outer edges of both heels. Is one noticeably more worn down than the other? A small difference is common. A dramatic difference is worth noting. Second, look at where the wear is concentrated. Is it fairly centered under the heel and ball of the foot, which is typical? Or is it pushed heavily toward one edge, like the outside or the inside of the shoe? Third, compare the two shoes directly against each other. Not just left versus what you'd expect, but left versus right, side by side. Are they roughly mirror images of one another? Or does one look meaningfully different from the other? Fourth, look at the overall shape. Has either shoe become tilted, leaning to one side when you set it on a flat surface? Fifth, think about location. Is there wear showing up somewhere unusual, like heavily on the inside edge of just one shoe, or concentrated at the very front of the toe box in a way that seems new? And finally, ask yourself this. Has this pattern changed recently compared to how your older shoes used to wear? That last question brings us to something I want you to actually try, because it's more useful than almost anything else in this video. If you have an older pair of everyday shoes sitting in your closet, shoes you wore regularly a year or two ago, go get them. Set them next to your current pair. A single old shoe on its own doesn't tell you much. But comparing an older wear pattern to a newer one can sometimes show you a gradual change that would be nearly impossible to notice day by day. It's the difference between looking at one photograph and watching a slow video. The video tells you more. Now let's talk about why one shoe might wear differently than the other, because this is where a lot of curiosity naturally shows up. Asymmetrical wear, meaning uneven wear between your left and right shoe, can sometimes reflect small differences in how a person distributes weight between their two legs while walking. Maybe slightly more weight shifts onto one leg than the other. Maybe one foot rolls a bit differently. But I want to be honest with you about something important. There are many possible explanations for this, and most of them are harmless. An old injury from decades ago, A favorite standing posture, the specific shoes you happen to be wearing, simple daily habits. None of that means there's a medical problem. A shoe cannot diagnose anything. What it can sometimes do is give you a reason to pay a little closer attention to how you feel when you walk. And that brings us to something worth connecting together. Shoe wear rarely exists in isolation. Sometimes, alongside a change in how a shoe is wearing, people also notice other small shifts in how walking feels. Things like taking slightly shorter steps than they used to, leaning a little more on one side without really thinking about it, feeling just a bit less steady than before, reaching for a countertop or a piece of furniture for extra support almost automatically, feeling some stiffness in the first several steps after getting up that eases after a minute or two, or simply feeling a little less confident while walking than they did a few years ago. I want to repeat something because it matters. These are observations, not diagnoses. Plenty of people notice one or two of these things, and it turns out to be nothing significant at all. But noticing is still worth something, because it gives you information you didn't have before. Beyond your shoes, there are other everyday clues that sometimes accompany a change in mobility, and I think it's worth knowing what they look like, simply so you can recognize them if they ever show up. Difficulty getting up from a low chair without using your hands to push off, needing to hold the railing more than you used to on the stairs, quietly avoiding uneven ground, like gravel or grass, without really deciding to, shuffling your feet a little more than you did in the past, catching your toes occasionally on a rug or a doorway threshold, taking a bit longer to turn around rather than pivoting quickly, or simply feeling less confident walking outside the house than you once did. Here's the honest truth. One of these on its own usually isn't a big deal, but when several of these things show up together, that combination is generally more worth mentioning to a healthcare professional than any single shoe mark by itself. Doctors and physical therapists are far more interested in patterns over time than in any one isolated detail. So let's talk directly about when this deserves more serious attention, because I don't want to leave that vague. Reach out to a healthcare professional if you notice a sudden major change in how you're walking rather than a slow one. New weakness in a leg or foot that wasn't there before. Pain that's significant and doesn't have an obvious explanation. Repeated falls, even minor ones. New problems with balance that are affecting your daily activities. Numbness or a loss of normal sensation in your feet or legs. Noticeable swelling that's new or getting worse. Or an inability to put your normal weight on one leg. And I want to be extremely clear about one category of symptoms, because it matters more than anything else in this video. If you or someone you know experiences sudden weakness on one side of the body, sudden drooping of the face, sudden difficulty speaking, sudden confusion, or sudden severe dizziness, that is not something to wait on. That requires immediate emergency medical attention, not a routine appointment down the road. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because knowing the difference between something worth mentioning at your next visit and something that needs immediate care is genuinely useful information, and it's information every person over 65 deserves to have clearly, without confusion. Now, let's shift gears for a moment, because the shoes themselves matter too, separately from what they might reveal. A worn-out sole with poor traction can make anyone less stable, regardless of how their body is functioning. A loose or broken-down heel can affect balance. Inadequate arch or ankle support can change how comfortable and secure walking feels. A shoe that's become misshapen from age can throw off your natural stride. Shoes that are too tight can affect circulation and comfort. And shoes that are excessively soft or unstable can actually make balance worse, not better. So there's an important distinction to hold in your mind. Sometimes a shoe is simply revealing a change that started somewhere else in the body. And sometimes the shoe itself is the actual problem, quietly making walking harder than it needs to be. Both are worth knowing about, and both are fixable in their own way. Let me walk you through a few everyday mistakes I see people make with this, because avoiding them is genuinely useful. throwing away old shoes without ever comparing their wear pattern to a newer pair, continuing to wear shoes long after the sole has become dangerously thin or slick, choosing new shoes based purely on how they look rather than how they fit and support the foot, ignoring a major, obvious difference between the left and right shoe for months or years, assuming that any uneven wear automatically means something serious, and spiraling into worry over nothing. Assuming the opposite, that uneven wear could never mean anything, and dismissing a genuine pattern. Brushing off repeated stumbles or balance concerns as simply getting older instead of mentioning them. Wearing smooth-soled slippers or sandals outdoors on wet or uneven surfaces. Using the exact same pair of shoes for every single activity, from gardening to walking to standing in the kitchen for hours. And waiting far too long, sometimes years, before mentioning a persistent change in walking to a doctor, simply out of not wanting to make a fuss. Let's clear up a few common myths while we're here, because misinformation on this topic tends to push people toward one of two unhelpful extremes: total panic or total dismissal. Myth: uneven shoe wear means you have a serious disease. Fact: not necessarily. Many completely harmless factors can affect how a shoe wears down. Myth: buying new shoes will fix any walking problem. Fact: sometimes better footwear genuinely helps, but a persistent, ongoing change in how you walk may still deserve a professional look, regardless of what shoes you're wearing. Myth: if your feet don't hurt, your walking must be fine. Fact: not every change in mobility or balance comes with pain. Some changes are painless and easy to overlook. Myth: older adults naturally become unsteady, so there's nothing to be done about it. Fact: some changes are simply part of getting older, but strength, balance, flexibility, vision, and footwear can often be improved or addressed, sometimes with fairly simple steps. Myth: if only one shoe wears differently than the other, it doesn't really matter. Fact: a consistent, repeated, left-right difference is often worth noticing, especially when it shows up alongside other small changes we've talked about today. Let me give you a few real-world examples of how this plays out, because I think it makes everything we've covered easier to picture. Imagine Margaret, 72 years old, who one afternoon happens to notice that the outside edge of her right shoe has worn down considerably more than her left. At first, she barely thinks about it. But a week later, while going through her closet, she finds a pair of walking shoes from 2 years earlier and sets them side by side with her current pair. The difference is much clearer than she expected. She mentions it to her physical therapist at her next regular visit, not out of alarm, simply out of curiosity. It becomes one small piece of a larger conversation about her overall strength and balance, nothing more dramatic than that. Imagine Robert, 68, who's been wearing the same pair of walking shoes for almost 3 years. The soles have gone smooth and slick, and he's noticed himself feeling less steady on damp pavement lately. Rather than assuming something is wrong with his body, he simply replaces the shoes with a new, supportive pair with proper tread. The unsteadiness on wet surfaces improves noticeably. Sometimes the fix really is that straightforward. And imagine Frank, 75, who notices uneven wear on his shoes, and around the same time realizes he's been holding onto the kitchen counter more than usual, and taking the stairs a little more carefully than he used to. On their own, none of these felt urgent. But together, they were enough for him to bring it up with his doctor at his next checkup. It turned into a helpful conversation about strength and balance exercises, one that he says he wishes he'd started a little sooner. None of these stories are meant to predict what will happen to you. They're simply here to show how ordinary, low drama, and non-alarming this kind of noticing usually is in real life. So here's what I want you to actually take away from today. Don't obsess over your shoes. That's not the goal here, and constantly worrying about it won't help you. A shoe is not a medical test, and it never will be one. But your everyday shoes can sometimes give you a simple, honest reason to pay a little more attention to how your walking has been feeling lately. That's all this is. Awareness, not fear. Tonight, or whenever you finish watching this, go find your 2 most worn everyday shoes. Set them side by side, soles up, and take a good look. Compare the wear on the left with the wear on the right. If you have an older pair tucked away somewhere, pull those out too and compare them to your current ones. When you look at the bottoms of your own shoes, do you notice the same amount of wear on both sides, or is there a difference? I'd genuinely like to know what you find, so leave a comment and let me know. If this video helped you look at something ordinary in a new way, I'd appreciate a like, and if you know someone who could use this same reminder, consider sharing it with them. And if you'd like more videos like this one, subscribing helps this channel keep making them. This channel shares educational health information based on reputable medical sources and is not a substitute for personalized medical advice. If you've noticed a persistent change in your walking, balance, or mobility, speak with a qualified healthcare professional.